Hey folks, in today's video, I wanted to do a website build video like you may have seen me done before, but I wanted this video to be very beginner friendly because even in my other website build projects, I do realize that I'm kind of assuming that you know certain information, and not everyone may know that yet depending on where they are in their learning process. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to build this front-end mentor challenge with HTML and CSS, and I'm also going to show you how to get set up with Visual Studio Code or VS Code. All right, so let's start with getting VS Code set up. If you haven't had it installed on your computer already, you can go to code.visualstudio.com, get to the website here, and then you can download for whatever operating system that you're using. Now, the next piece that we're going to need before we get started is the actual Front-End Mentor challenge files. So what you want to do is go to frontendmentor.io, and then you are going to have to sign in. I use my GitHub login to sign in. And then you want to go to the challenges page. And this is where all these different designs are that we can build. Now, just to make this quicker, I already know that I want to build this recipe challenge. So in the search bar, search for recipe. And this is what we want, recipe page. And then you notice that it is a newbie level, so it's good for beginners. Now on the actual challenge page, this gives you a little bit of an overview. And if you haven't clicked this button, it'll probably say start challenge. So you want to make sure you click the start challenge button, and then you can get access to the starter files. And you can read the overview about this. Next, we want to get the actual starter files. So you want to go to the download assets, and we're going to download the starter files. Now, if you have a Front-End Mentor Pro membership, you will have access to the actual Figma design, but I'm actually not going to use a design in this video, even though I usually do, just to give those of you who are trying to use this completely for free the chance to follow along with me without having to pay for membership. But once you are at the point where you have some money in your budget where you can invest in your learning career, I do recommend Front-End Mentor Pro just because you get access to a lot of different challenges. And these are really great ways to practice your coding skills and add to your portfolio. And this is not sponsored, but I do work with them and I have an affiliate link, but I have been using them for years and I highly recommend them. All right, so once you have downloaded the starter files, you're going to want to go to your File Explorer so we can start setting them up. So I'm on Windows, and in File Explorer, I'm in my Downloads folder. So you can see we have the recipe page main zip file. If I double click, I'll go into the zip file, and then let's also double click again and go into that folder. So here are the files that we're going to use for our project. We don't actually need all of these, but I am going to just show you a quick walkthrough of what these are. Let's just copy everything here. And we want to move all these files and folders onto our computer in the place that we want to store them. So because I use GitHub, I'm going to store most of my coding projects in my Documents GitHub folder. You can store these anywhere you want. If you're on Windows, I just wouldn't put something in like your C drive root folder because there's some permissions issues that can come with that. So usually somewhere in your Documents folder should work. Now, in our GitHub folder, I'm going to create a new subfolder. I'm going to call this FEM for Front-End Mentor, and let's just call this recipe. So if we go into this new folder, we can copy the starter files and then paste them in here. There we go. Okay, so we have our files all set up, and now we can open our project in VS Code. All right, so here we have VS Code. And I'm not going to show you, all the ins and outs of Visual Studio Code, but I'm going to show you the basics of what you need to do to get started with this project. So in VS Code, the one thing that I pretty much almost always do is I'm going to open a folder, not a specific file. And the reason for that is you want to open the entire project folder in VS Code so that it can detect certain things, and it helps with probably like running the local server and things like that. So if you go to File, Open Folder, then you can select the folder that we just created, FEM recipe. And now, and then if you trust it, which we do because it's from Front-End Mentor, I'll click, yes, I trust the authors. And now we have all the files and folders that we're in our File Explorer, now we've opened the entire folder in VS Code, so we can now navigate throughout the different subfolders. So let's take a look at what the different files are. So the most important one is probably the index.html file. And this is the starter HTML code from Front-End Mentor. And it is helpful to work from here because we have all the copy here so that we don't have to, type things out manually. And the next thing we want to look at is the README. So if there's a README file, you usually want to read that first. So here's some notes on it. So your task is to build out the project to the designs inside the design folder. You'll find both a mobile and a desktop version of the design. The designs are in a JPEG static format. And then again, it tells you if you need the design file, then you can only get access to that if you're a pro member. And what they're talking about is in this design subfolder here, we have these two JPEGs. So we have the desktop design here, and this is what we're going to be working from for the desktop. And then mobile design is also in here. And you can see that, it is mobile sized as opposed to desktop sized. So let's just open these to kind of use them as references for when we're building the site later. Okay. Next up, we also want to check out the assets folder. And this is where all the image files and other files that we need for the website are going to be stored. So you can see here we have a fonts folder. And then these are the two, I'm assuming, font families, Outfit and Young Serif. And let's see what we have here. True type font. And I actually am probably going to use a different method for loading the fonts, and I'll show you what those are. Because it's like true type. What we actually want is WOFF, WOFF2 format for our fonts. Those are kind of the more widely used in modern fonts, but I'll show you how to get these fonts in a little bit. The other subfolder in the assets is the images folder. And here we have a favicon. And the favicon is what's going to show up in your browser when you load the website in your tab. And then we have the image of the omelet. All right, so the last sort of setup thing that we're going to do in VS Code is we want to run this website as a local website. And the best way to do that is in VS Code, if you go to the extensions menu, and we're going to use the live server extension. So live server, and I'm just going to load the top result here. So if you don't have this extension installed on your computer, this button here should say install, and you can click it to install on your computer. And you might need to restart VS Code, but once you do, you should be able to see in the bottom right-hand corner this Go Live button. And when you click that, it's going to run a local server and load all these files in your local website. So if we click that, now we can see this is the website, and we only have text in our starter files in our index.html, so that's what's here. And one big thing that I always do when I'm building a website is use the developer tools in your browser. I'm using Firefox, so you can use Firefox, you can use Chrome, which is the most popular browser. I personally like Firefox just because I feel like it has some really nice tools for Flexbox and Grid. So to use the developer tools, you can right-click and go to Inspect. And this should be the same no matter what browser you're using, because they all kind of have the same functionality. So in your inspector tool, you can see that we're on the inspector, and this is the actual HTML that's getting loaded in our local site, and this should match what we have in our index.html. So we just have text for now inside the body tag. And then once we write more CSS, we'll be able to see more style rules for each tag down on the bottom panel here in the Rules tab. So right now we just kind of have some basic styles. We don't have any styles yet. So let's start with that. And in VS Code, we want to create our CSS file. So in our Solution Explorer, what they call it here, in the left sidebar, you can either right-click, or you can also click this new file icon here. I'm going to right-click and select New File. So we're going to create a new style.css file. And we've created this CSS file, but we need it to get loaded in our index.html file. So if we go here, and I'm just going to close the sidebar for now, so you can see things a little bit better. We want to load our CSS file in our HTML head tag. So usually I will do it after the title. And the way you do that is if you type in link, VS Code has these really handy emit shortcuts. And we are looking for link CSS. And this will generate the code for you so you don't have to keep typing, all these angle brackets and stuff like that. And by default, it's going to load style.css. And this will work because our CSS file is in the same level of the folders as the index.html file. But usually what I do is start with a /. And this / will make sure that it's going to go to the root of your website and then sort of navigate to whatever subfolder, if necessary, from there. So we have this loaded, and we'll save our index.html file. Now let's go into our style.css file, and we're going to add some style so that we can make sure it's working and loading in our website. So I'm going to add some boilerplate styles that I always add to any website. So we'll start with an asterisk, and this is a wildcard selector which will select every single HTML tag. And we'll do a compound selector, so we're going to add a comma. We're also going to select for wildcard before pseudo element and wildcard after. And then for all of these elements on the website, we want to set box sizing border box. This is probably the number one most important rule you want to make sure you have on your website, because it'll make sure that the size of elements will sort of incorporate padding into the final width and height. Otherwise, if you don't have this rule, any padding you add is going to add to the width and height of the elements, which can cause some kind of weird, unexpected behaviors. So always want to add this to your styles. And then we can add some other styles. I'm not going to do too many, just so you can see what some of these default browser styles end up being. But I'm going to say on the body, margin 0. And I think we're just going to leave it there for now. So we have our styles in our style.css file. We've saved our changes. Let's go to our local website and make sure these styles are loading in our website. So now we're in our local website, and when we make and save changes in VS Code while we're running the live server extension, it should automatically reload our website. And you can actually see now on the left sidebar, we have some styles and we didn't have them before. So if we have the body tag selected up here, then we can see the CSS rules that are applying to it. So we can see this margin 0, which we added, and then we have the box sizing border box. And you can sort of trace back and see where in your CSS file this style came from. If you go to this link here, it says style.css 7. So this means it is on line 7 of your CSS file. If we click that, there is a little bit of navigation in Firefox where you can sort of see the actual CSS file in Firefox. And this is basically what we wrote, right? So we have our box sizing border box rule, and then we have our body margin 0 rule. And that matches exactly what we have here. I just turned off my line numbers in VS Code. So basically all the fonts that Front End Mentor uses in their designs are from Google Fonts. And you can go to the Google Fonts website and you can click on the font family that you need. If you click on Get Font, you're going to be able to use this embed code that they have, and this will load the Google Fonts on your website, which is the easiest way of doing it. However, the problem with it is that you are loading the font files as well as the CSS for the fonts from Google servers. And what that means is that Google can then track the IP address of everyone who visits your website and loads it. And this is not in compliance with the GDPR guidelines. So what I've started doing is using the font files from Google Fonts, but locally. Now, unfortunately, you can't get the WOFF font files from Google Fonts. However, there is this really awesome website that you can use called Google Web Fonts Helper. So here's Google Web Fonts Helper, and what you can do is get all of the different file formats that you need for modern browsers from this website, and they stay pretty up to date with the Google Fonts as far as I can tell. So we want to search for the first font family. So I don't remember what that was called. So let's check back here. So it's Outfit and then Young Serif. And I think we can type it in, Outfit, and here it is. And then you can download the files here. Now you do need to download a separate font file for every weight. So we need to go back and check what font weights we need to use for each of these font families. So another file that's really helpful from Frontend is this style guide markdown file. So if we open that, we can get some notes on the different styles that we're going to be using. So for example, body copy, the paragraph font size is 16 pixels. So we will be able to add those to our styles later. And then they also have some notes on the fonts. So looks like the Outfit font family that we're looking at, we're using weights 400, 600, and 700. So 400 is regular, 600 is semi-bold, 700 is bold. So let's go back to Google Web Fonts Helper, and we're going to have regular selected by default 400. Then we want to check the box for 600 and 700. And you do want to make sure you're not using too many different weights or too many different font families, because each individual font family and weight is going to add to your page load. So you want to keep them minimal when you can. Okay, so next up here is CSS styles that we're going to have to add to our styles to load these fonts. But let's get the actual files here. So click this download button, and we have our font files. So now we can go in our downloads folder, and I have the zip file for the Outfit font. So if we go into the zip file, we now have 3 different WUF2 files for each of the different weights that we downloaded. So let's copy these, and then I'm going to go back to our project folder, and we need to figure out where to put these font files. I'm going to put them in the assets folder, and I guess in the fonts subfolder, and we'll just put them in the root here. There we go. So now the other one is a Young Serif and 400. So we only have the regular font weight. Actually, before that, we need to get the CSS styles to load this font family in our style. So I'm going to copy this whole code here. And we want to put it in our CSS styles. So for fonts, you probably want to put them up at the top of your CSS file so that any styles referring to them will be able to load them. Because I think if you put them after styles that are loading the font family, it may not work. So it's going to save that there. And now we can go download the font for the other one, Young Serif. So let's go back to Google Web Fonts Helper and Young Serif. Oops. And for this one, we just want bold. Or I'm sorry, I think just regular. Okay, just regular. This is the only font weight that is available for this font family, so that's fine. So let's download it. And then go to our downloads folder again, and go into the zip file, copy the font file, and then we'll paste it in the same font subfolder. There we go. Okay. Then we want to copy the styles for the font family, and then we want to paste it in our style.css file again. I'll just add it after the other ones and then before our actual styles down here. Okay. So one thing you do want to kind of make sure you have set up correctly is you want your paths to be correct. So for example, from the styles that we got from Google Web Fonts Helper, they by default are telling you where the font file is located in your project. So URL ... // So what this means is from the current file, the style.css file, it's going to go up one level because of the double dots. Then it's going to look for the fonts. So I think that is not correct. So let's close all our folders here. We're coming in from the style.css file, which is in the root. And Then we want to go to the assets folder and then the fonts folder. So kind of like what I did with the link tag in our HTML to load our style.css file, I usually like to just start with a / to go to the project root, no matter where you're coming from, and then add in the folders to the path to the file. So from the CSS file in the root, we want to go to the assets folder. So assets, and then VS Code is very helpful with this. Assets, and then fonts, which we have here. So we actually need to copy and replace this everywhere else. So / assets instead of the double dots. And I could have done this in the Google Web Fonts Helper website. If you look here, you can customize your folder prefix. So what I should have done was just delete the double dots and then have the /, and then you can type in the path that you want. Okay, so we have our fonts. Now we need to load them and make sure, they're working in our website. So it looks like the outfit is going to be our sort of regular body text, and then the young serif is going to be for titles. And we can kind of look back at the design if we're not sure. So you can see, the title is with the serif font, meaning it has like those sort of sticks at the end. And then we have the sans serif or without serifs for the regular text down here. Okay, so let me close our thing here. The best way to test it out, or the quickest way rather, is to set your font family on the body tag. And this is what I do because if you set it on the body tag, all the other elements are going to inherit that font family from the body tag. So what we want to do is type in, what was it again? Outfit. I'm going to copy that. And then you always want to have a backup. So because it's a sans serif, I'm going to say, you can say Arial Helvetica sans serif. And you can also do the same thing for the serif font. And that's going to be used for titles. So let's look at the design again. The simple omelet recipe is probably going to be an H1 tag, and I will show you the different tags we're going to be using. And then H2 for ingredients and instructions and nutrition. Okay. So we're going to do is H1, H2. I don't know if we're going to need an H3, but we're going to do font family, and we want to have the right name, of course, young serif. And then we're going to have our fallbacks. So we'll say serif. And then VS Code has some options you can do. Georgia, Times New Roman, times serif. So these fallbacks are important in case there's some issue with your font files, or maybe I typed in the wrong path so they're not loading correctly. Then it'll fall back to browser fonts, which every computer and browser should be able to load. So now that we've added our fonts, let's go to our website and see how it looks. And I can see that I don't know why this is loading like that. So I can see the font family on our website is different than what it was before. The next thing that we want to do is we want to get our HTML all set up. So in our index.html file, if we go down to the body tag, we have all the text or the copy that's on the website. So nothing's in tags right now, so we do need to add that in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the mobile design on a new tab on the right panel. So if you right click the tab, you can say split right. So then it's going to split your VS Code editor into two panels, and we have the mobile design on the right side. So then on the left, we can load our index.html, and let's zoom in to the image so we can see things better. So here's our design that we're going to be working from. So we'll just kind of scoot it over there. Okay, so when you're creating a website, you do need to make sure that you're using the correct semantic HTML tags. And semantic just means that each tag in HTML usually will have a specific purpose. It could be a generic tag, and that would be a div or span tag that doesn't have any additional roles or functionality associated with it. But there's other tags, like for example, for the simple omelet recipe, that's the title of the website, so you want to use an H tag or a headline tag for that. So for example, let's type in H1 for the title, because you always start with 1 for the title of the website, and then copy, and we're going to just move the text up into there. So we want to make sure that you're using the right tags for the text as well as other elements. So we'll do another example, paragraph tag. So I'm again using the Emmet shortcut in VS Code, where I don't have to type out the angle brackets, but I can just type P and then Emmet abbreviation. If I hit enter a tab, it's going to generate all that for me. So let's add the paragraph tag in there. So easy quick dish, and then it ends at, oops. Let's turn on word wrapping. So Alt Z, there we go. So we'll take that paragraph text, move it up in there. So now you can see these are some different tags that we have. So let's look at the website and see how things changed based on just using some of these tags. So here's our website. You can see that the H1 tag, it's really big. And this is from browser default styles. We haven't added any styles of our own except for setting the font family. So these are kind of like a holdover from when the internet was older and most websites kind of look like Word documents. The browser would automatically make, H tags bigger than, say, paragraph tags. But we are going to add our styles here and our styles to make it match the design. Now, back in our index.html file, we also want to add in the image of the omelet. So we can do that with an image tag. So again, using Emmet, I'm going to type in img and tab. So in the source attribute, we want to go to our image. So if I do front slash, it's going to load the autocomplete from VS Code, which is really handy. And the omelet image was in the assets folder, images, and then image omelet. So this should load. And anytime you're loading an image that kind of has a, it's a descriptive image with information the viewer might want to know, if they can't visually see the image, is we want to use alt text. So I'm going to just try to describe this image here in the alt text. So omelette with, looks like spinach and tomatoes. Tomatoes on a plate. And then save. So, you always want to have descriptive alt text for people who are using screen readers to navigate the web, because it'll read out the visual description that we've put in the alt text. The other thing you want to do with images is set a width and height attributes based on the image. And this is going to tell the browser the aspect ratio of the image, so it'll know how much vertical space to leave in case it, maybe takes a while for the image to load on the website, to avoid the text kind of shifting after the image loads. So you're telling the browser how tall the image is going to have to be based on the existing width, and it's going to sort of have that space there already. So to get the width and the height, let's go to the image. And I need to show the bottom bar again. So this is telling us it is 1312 by 600. So 1312 by 600. There we go. And then I'm just going to try to hide that just to have more space for the actual code. Okay, so now we have our image. So let's just check our website and see if our changes went through. And that is something I try to do when I'm building a website. If I make one change, I'll usually quickly check the website just to make sure the change, is reflected. Because if you make a bunch of different changes, especially if they get more complex, and then you check your website, if something's not working right or looking right, you don't know exactly where it came from because you made all those different changes. So I try to check things here. Okay, this is one good thing to know. So this image is huge and it's causing horizontal scrolling, which you really don't want. So to fix this for all images, we can actually add another set of sort of boilerplate styles. So in our CSS file, one thing you can do to fix this is setting in your image tag selector max width of 100%. So this will prevent the image from going beyond the bounds of the container. So now you can see it is loading and the horizontal scrolling is not there, but you can also see that it is now skewed. So we can fix that by setting height to auto. So this will tell the browser to automatically set the height to whatever the available width of the image is. So let's save that. So now it looks less skewed. And if we change the width of the viewport, you can see that the height is changing along with the width so that the image maintains a correct aspect ratio. All right, so we're making some pretty good progress here. So we're just going to keep going down this design and making sure everything is in the correct tags. So the next thing is this sort of card, and it says preparation time, and then there's a bulleted list. So what we can do here is I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to give it a class of, we'll just say card, and that's so that we can attach these styles for that sort of pink background color to this div. So to do that, we'll say a dot for a class, and then we'll just type in the div's class name. So we'll say card. So you can see an abbreviation is going to detect what we've written and it knows what HTML to generate based on this. So if I hit tab or enter, now it's created a div with a class of card. And we can add in the text that we have in here. So the preparation time is a title. So because we have H1 above it, we kind of want to go in order. So I'm going to say H2 and then add this in here. So we want to create a bulleted list, and to do that we can use the unordered list tag, so UL, and then inside the unordered list we want to create list items for each of those bulleted items. So list item, and we want to add in the text here. And we want to make the total text bold. So we're going to use the strong tag. And then we want to move the total text inside there. There we go. All right, so for the other two list items, I think I'm just going to select the list item and then press Control-Alt-D should be the shortcut to duplicate it. There we go. So now I can just kind of replace the text in here. Preparation, 5 minutes. And then cooking, 5 minutes. There we go. Okay, so now let's check out our website and see what things look like. All right, so we have our H2 tag. You can see it's a little bit bigger than the paragraph tag. Then we have our list with bullets, which looks pretty good. And right now we're not going to worry about, the background color and stuff like that. I'm really just trying to get all of the content, meaning the text and images on the website, set up in the right HTML tags. And then once we do that for the entire website, then we'll move on to writing our styles to make things look the way that they should. All right, so after the preparation time card, we're gonna have some more text here. And I think the ingredients should be an H2 tag also. And you can do things differently if you want, but these are gonna be both H2 tags, at least the way I'm building this website, because I try to look at the website like an outline. where you have a title, might have some text under it, and then we have another title, but it's sort of nested under the simple omelet recipe. So that's why I think preparation time, ingredients, instructions, nutrition, those titles or those subtitles all seem to be kind of on the same level. So I think they should all be H2 tags. And then we can add CSS to style this card title a bit differently. Okay, so next up, we're going to do the ingredients. So H2. And if you want to, you can pause the video here and try to create the HTML tags. And then you can unpause when you're done and see if what you did matches up with what I'm doing. So I'm going to move the ingredients copy in there. And then again, we're going to create an unordered list because it's bullets. So UL for the bulleted list. And then in there, we'll say LI again. And then we can, maybe I'll duplicate these again. 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And now we can just move the copy into the correct LI tag. Okay, so there is our H2 tag for ingredients and then the unordered list. So let's save and then check our website. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so we're just gonna pretty much keep doing the same thing for the next step. So again, we'll use an H2 tag for instructions. Now, this is different. This is a list again, like we had up here, but instead of bullets, we have numbers. So this tells me that instead of an unordered list, we want an ordered list. So instead of the UL tag, you can use the OL tag for ordered list. And then we'll add an LI. And then I will just duplicate these 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And actually, to be a little bit more efficient, what I could do is in the LI tag, I can add a strong tag kind of already set up. So that way I can duplicate this. So now I can just move the copy up. And let's just fold these up. So beat the eggs. Move it into the strong tag. And then paragraph down to fluffier texture after it. Make sure there's a space. And then the next one is heat the pan. And then add a space. And then move that paragraph text here. Cook the omelet. And then all the way to coat the surface. Add fillings optional. There we go. Fold and serve. There we go, onto a plate. And then the last one, enjoy. Serve hot. There we go. Okay, so there is our ordered list. So I'm going to save and check out our website. So now we have our instructions. And you can see that we have the list down there and it has numbers instead of the bullets. Okay, so we're just going to keep going here. We're getting towards the end of this. So the last section is this nutrition table. So this is going to be a little bit different. It is going to start out with another H2 tag for nutrition. And then we'll add a paragraph tag for that text. And now it's going to be a little more complicated. We need to create our table. And a table is something that you can create in HTML. Now, if you haven't worked with tables or you're not sure where to start, or you just need a refresher on how to do it in HTML, there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm going to use this table as an example of how to research what you need in web development without using ChatGPT or another AI tool. And I think this is really important for beginners to not get so dependent on ChatGPT that you just don't ever actually learn how to write code yourself. So in our search engine, DuckDuckGo, I'm going to search Mozilla Developer Network. This is a website, MDN, run by Mozilla, who creates Firefox. And they basically have all the documentation that you would need for HTML, CSS, and also, I think, JavaScript. So we're going to search their website, MDN, by typing in MDN, and then we're going to type in what we're looking for. So HTML, and then tables. All right, so this first result here, the table element in HTML, that looks like what we want. So let's go there. And I do highly, highly recommend you getting familiar with MDN because I use this all the time, even if I feel like I can call myself an experienced developer, because you don't remember everything in your brain. And I think that's okay, but you just need to figure out where you can go to find the information you're looking for. And MDN is a really big help for that. So they have this example code here. You can see there's a table tag and there's a bunch of other tags. So let's just look at the actual table that this is generating. So in this table, the title is, there's a title row. So person, most interested in, age. And then there's rows for each person with their name, I guess what their interest is, and then their age. And then there's another row at the bottom with the average age. And then there's a caption at the bottom, front-end web developer course. So this is much more complicated than the table we're using. For one thing, we don't have, this title row here, and we don't have the, I guess, footer row or the caption. And we only have 2 columns in our table. So we are not going to need all the code that is here, but it's good to look at an example of what's considered best practice. So you can see that the table tag is what we do want to have. We don't need the caption. And I don't think we need the head, the T head, because we don't have this sort of title row here. But we do have, so T body is where all of the content in the table goes. And then in the T body, we have rows. So each row is in a TR tag. And then within the row, you can have a sort of header for that row. So for example, it's the person's name. And I do think we have that in our table. Calories would be considered the header because that's kind of like the label for what the information is about. So we probably want to use TH, and then TD is going to be a cell. So for each of the TH and TDs, that content is going to be in one of the cells in the table. And I think that's all that we need. And I'm actually not sure about the scope row. Let's look that up. The scope attribute in a header cell is redundant in simple context because scope is inferred. So this is not a complex table that we're working with, so I think we don't need to add the scope. But let's kind of keep this open so we can sort of work from it in our own code. So we're going to add the table tag. And then we said T body. And then TR for the rows. So yeah, table. And then T body. And then each row gets a TR tag. So then we do want a TH tag and then a TD tag. So TH and then TD. And that should work for our table. So let's add the information for the first row just to make sure it looks correct on the website. All right, so calories is sort of the header for this first row. So this goes in the TH tag. And then 277 kcal. All right, so let's save and then check out our website. And I'm actually going to add some temporary styles to the website here so I can scroll up a little bit better. So 1 second. In the body tag, and you don't need to do this. This is just for sort of the video purposes. adding a bottom. We'll say 50 VH. This is a viewport height unit. So we'll add space on the bottom of the body tag equal to half the height of our screen. So now I can scroll it more so you can see it better. I don't know why I keep getting that. I think there's maybe a slight bug. Okay, so we got our table text here, and I'm just going to zoom in so you can see that a bit better. So we have our table, T-body, now we have a TR. You can see that because they are tables, they've put the cells next to each other. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. It's nice that it automatically bolded the header. So let's go back to our HTML, and we want to add in the other rows. So again, I'm going to select this and then duplicate it 3 times. So carbs, 0 grams. Protein, 20 grams. Fat, 22 grams. Save. And let's check out our website again. Cool. So this does look sort of like a table. There's no lines yet, but the default styles in Firefox just kind of put things in the proper position where we have each cell on the same row. Okay, so I think that might actually be the end of the website. Yeah, that's all that we have in our design. All right, so now that we have our HTML, we can move on to writing some more styles so that our website looks like it does on the design. And to help with that, I have the desktop design open on the left and the mobile design open on the right. And I do try to look at and sort of study the designs before I jump into the CSS and start writing a bunch of styles, just so that I can figure out what I want to do. And I'm going to share with you my approach that I use when I'm, building a website from a design. So usually what I do is I kind of add the basic styles, and you saw that we did already add some of those boilerplate styles in our CSS file. But when I'm looking at the design, I kind of want to start big and then kind of move progressively smaller down to individual specific sections. So for example, I want to, if I look at the desktop design, we have this sort of beige background color. That's kind of a big page level thing. And then the recipe itself is in this like white card with rounded corners. So what I would probably start doing is getting the background color set for the beige, getting the white background color and the rounded corners on the recipe itself, and then also making sure that the white recipe card is centered in the background. And it is a little bit different on mobile. On mobile, it looks like because, we have a much narrower viewport width, we just have kind of everything is going full width and we don't have the beige background color or the card. So once we figure that sort of big page level stuff out, then I might move down to go kind of section by section through the design. So, we'd start with the omelette image, and then we would make sure that the text in this sort of top intro part is the right color and also the right font size for both desktop and for mobile. And then we just basically make our way down. We would tackle this sort of pink or purple preparation time card, then the ingredients with the unordered list, the instructions with the ordered list, and then the nutrition table. So breaking things down kind of makes it easier to, wrap your head around so you don't feel like you have to do everything all at once. So that is one thing that I try to do. So with that in mind, let's get some of these colors that we actually got from Frontend and put them in our styles. So this is in the style guide markdown file. So if we read some of the notes that they have here, it's telling us that the mobile and desktop designs are to these pixel widths. And then we have the colors. And the colors are in HSL format, which is the format that I prefer. This is because it makes it easier to lighten or darken a color, because the last number of these 3 numbers is L, which is lightness. So the higher the lightness, the lighter the color will be. The lower the number, the darker it's going to be. So what I think I might do is move this over to the right panel and go to our styles. And I'm going to just basically copy these HSL colors into our styles. Now, I am going to use CSS custom properties for our colors. So the best way to do that, I think, is you want to set the custom properties on a selector, and you usually want to set them on a root selector. This is the root document of the entire website, and setting the colors here in the custom properties will make sure that you can access them even from other elements. So what we're going to do is we want to start writing the names. So a double dash for the custom property, and because these are colors, I'm going to add a C so we know that it's a color. And then we're going to add the name of the color, so white. So that's a name, then we add a colon, and then we're going to put the HSL color. There we go. So we're going to do the same thing for all of these other colors. So C, and then I'm just going to use the same naming that they have here, Stone 100. Copy this. And then maybe to make things easier, I will duplicate it 3 times. So the next one is Stone 150. And then Stone 600. And then Stone 900. There we go. Okay, next up is brown. I guess brown 800, even though there's only one brown. And then rose 800. And then C rose 50. There we go. Okay. So let's save. So now we have our colors. So as I said, we want to start with the desktop background color. So because this looks like it's going, all the way across, I'm going to set that background color on the body tag. And we do need to figure out what color this is. Because we don't have the Figma file, we can't sort of see that information. So we're going to just kind of try to eyeball it. So I'm going to make a guess and say it's the Stone 100 color. Oops. So Stone 100 is going to be the background color. And another thing that I do with the custom properties, and you don't have to do this, but I feel like it's maybe a little bit more intuitive later on. I have the colors themselves saved as custom properties, but I'm also going to create another set of custom properties for where the color is actually going to be used. I don't know what the right name for it is, but it's kind of like a functional custom property. So let me show you what I mean. So this is again going to be color, but I'm going to type out color just to show how it's different from the ones we've made before. And we'll say background. And I'm going to set this to the value of the Stone 100 color. And you can take advantage of the autocomplete that VS Code has. So Stone, what was it, 100, I think we said. There we go. So to load a custom properties value, which we're doing with the Stone 100, you can type it in a var function. And you can set, as we've done here, you can set the value of one custom property as a value of another custom property. So the benefit for doing it this way is that we kind of save the color. So if we ever change the color, we can just change it in the place where it's getting affected on the website. And I guess we can say add another background color for the recipe background. So color recipe, and we'll do white. There we go. So now let's add these custom properties in our styles for the body. So let's just add it here. So background, I kind of like using background color, the specific property, but you can also use the shorthand background. And this is a shorthand property for background color, background image. multiple properties, but I like being a bit more specific. So background color, and then I want to load the color background CSS custom property. So I'm sorry, yeah, the color background. There we go. And actually, now that I think about it, I should probably rename the color recipe to be color recipe background. Or maybe color background recipe. There we go. So now the body background has this color. So let's, we've saved our styles. Let's go to the website and see if it worked. And look, it's now that light beige color. And I think that's the right color. It's the lightest color that we have that's not white. So I think that's probably right. So it worked, which is great. But now we need to make the recipe itself have a white background color. And, you know, where do we want to put that style? So if we're not sure, we can always go back to the index.html file and we can just look at our markup and see where we want to set this color to be. So here we have the body tag, and then we have the image and then the sort of text content for all the elements in the recipe. So if we look at our design, everything, the image and the text is all in this white sort of recipe card. So I think what we need to do is put all the content that's in the body in another nested tag. So let's just minimize everything else we have here. There we go. And I'm going to create a new div inside the body tag. So div, give it a class of, and you don't have to explicitly write div for a div tag. You can just give it a class and it'll be by default div. I'm going to just call this recipe. There we go. So now we need to select everything else in the website, maybe not the attribution, and then move it into this div. So let's save that. There we go. So now everything is in the recipe class div. So that looks pretty good. And here's where we can write our style. And we want the recipe div to have that white background color. So in order to target it in our styles, we need to remember this class name. So I'm going to copy the class name recipe. And then in our styles, after our global style that we wrote before, we're going to write our selector. So it's the recipe class. So it has to start with a dot to indicate it's a class. And then in the curly brackets, we can set our background color. So in the same way, background color, and then I'll take advantage of autocomplete again for recipe. There we go. Color background recipe. So now let's save and make sure the change went through. There we go. Now you might notice it's covering up the beige background color that we had here, but the style's still there. We just haven't added styles to limit the width of the recipe here. So let's do that now and try to figure out what width we want to set the recipe div to be. And it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm going to maybe try to just kind of eyeball this since we don't have Figma. So I'm just going to make a guess and we'll work from there. So let's say recipe, and we want to set a max width. And when you're sizing elements in CSS, it's usually better to use either min width or height or max width or height instead of saying, you know, width of this specific number, because that can cause overflow issues if the text can't, you know, fit inside that static number. So let's say max width of, and I use rems when I'm sizing things, so that might be a little confusing if you're using pixels, but rems are just more accessible. So 1 rem equals 16 pixels. So let's guess maybe 40 rems. And if you're not sure what that is, I'll show you. So 40 times 16 is 640. So that actually might be too narrow. So let's try 60. And again, I'm gonna eyeball. So let's zoom out a little bit. So now when we zoom out, you can see that, you know, we have gotten the beige background color. Let's actually emulate. So in Firefox, you can turn on responsive design mode up here. So you can choose different devices. So for example, this is an iPhone 11. And we can go down to this custom one that I built for a laptop at 1200 pixels. So you might need to zoom out to see everything, but there we go. So you can see that the beige area is showing now because the recipe is, only limited to, if we go to the layout tab, 960 pixels, which is what the 60 rems was. So we're getting there. Might still be a little bit wide, I think. So the card goes, let's see, simple omelet recipe, but also we don't have the correct font size. So this is a little bit challenging. Okay, so this whole image is 1440, which is a desktop. So we can kind of maybe eyeball it from there. So the card itself is maybe more than half. So let's change to 1440. So yeah, this is not quite there. So one thing that I do a lot when I'm not sure what style is, I can test it in the browser. And you can make these changes and they'll get affected on the website, but it's not going to actually save to your file. So don't, reload the page and you'll lose all these temporary styles. But let's go down a little bit. So that's a little more than half. So maybe this would be about half here. It's maybe 52 rems. So I'm going to copy this value and then paste it here in our styles. Okay, so now we have our container of the beige, and we want to center the card. And we also want to, I think, move it down a bit. So we want to add some padding around it. So to center it, that's a layout thing. So that sort of tells us that we want to use probably Flexbox or Grid for that. And when you're working with Flexbox or Grid, you need to identify the Flex or Grid parent and then the child that's inside it. So the recipe, this should be the Flex or Grid parent. So this needs to have a parent that we can set the Grid or Flex style on. And the parent is the body tag. And you shouldn't really, I try not to put like layout styles and stuff on the body tag. So I'm going to create another div here. And we're going to say, give it a class, and let's just say wrapper. And then I'm going to fold up the recipe div and move it inside the wrapper. There we go. So if we reload, now we have this wrapper div. So what we want to do is we want to make this a Flex or Grid parent. It doesn't really matter which one you want to do. You can probably do either. So I'm going to click this plus icon here. It's going to add a temporary style for the selector of that element that I have. And for the wrapper class, we'll say display grid. And one thing you can do is to center the grid child, the recipe div, vertically and horizontally. You can say place items center. So now you can see that we have the recipe now centered horizontally. Now it's not vertically. We do want to kind of move it down and have space at the bottom. One way we can do that is to add padding on the wrapper. And padding is how I like to add extra space between a parent and then the child. So padding, and I only want to add it on the top and bottom. So you can do that with padding block. And this lets you set top and bottom, and it doesn't set anything on the left and the right. So it's really handy that way. So again, we're just going to start eyeballing with 10 rems. There we go. And we want to refer back to the design. And that looks, maybe needs to be a bit less. Yeah. So again, we're not trying to be super pixel perfect because we don't have the Figma design, but that looks pretty decent to me. So we're going to copy this, actually copy the whole thing, including the wrapper class selector. And in our styles, I try to follow the order of the elements. So in the markup, the wrapper is before the recipe div. So I'm going to follow that same order here and put wrapper styles before the recipe styles. Okay, so we have that. We saved. Let's load it. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now, you might remember, as I showed you, the mobile design looks different. The mobile design doesn't have that beige surrounding. So that means that we need to make some responsive styles to make sure that the correct, version of this appearance loads on, mobile devices and then desktop devices. So what we want to do is figure out the difference between the mobile and the desktop styles. So the difference is the mobile style doesn't have the beige background because the card is basically going the entire width and doesn't have that padding on the top and bottom. So what we can do is let's look at our website and see how it looks on a mobile view. And then that will help us figure out what needs to change. I'm going to zoom in a bit more. So here's an iPhone view, and this part looks pretty close to what we had in the JPEG. We do have that padding on the top and on the bottom. So I think that this should be the only thing that we need to remove from our styles because, as it gets bigger, then this is where the beige will start appearing. So we do need to get rid of that padding. And the padding is from the padding block, which is here. So to have different styles for different viewport widths, we need to use a media query. So for a media query, you add it by doing @media, and you can take advantage of the Emmet abbreviation, although I'm not going to. I'm just going to type in media. And then you want to write the condition in which these upcoming styles that we're going to write will take effect. So usually you want to have your mobile styles be the default styles, meaning outside of the media query. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the padding block style rule into this media query. So this is going to be the desktop styles. And we're going to designate it with width of greater than or equal to a certain width, and then curly brackets, and then we're going to move this in there. So we need to figure out what width we want. And I think that the style guide said 1440 for desktop, but there's some desktops that I think are smaller. They're like maybe 1200 or 1100. So I'm actually going to calculate 1100 pixels wide, and I'm going to make that my desktop breakpoint. So 1100 divided by 16 is going to be 68.75. Again, I do use rems because it's better for accessibility. But if you're just kind of practicing styles and this is just kind of too confusing for you, you can use pixels. Just know that, best practice, it's better to use rems. So I'm going to go back to rems. But if you want to remember, I'll add a comment saying 1100 pixels. Maybe we'll add it before. So this is just to kind of remind us what this 68.75 rems really means. Okay, so now if you look at our styles, the wrapper by default will have it'll be a grid parent and it'll have things centered. And then once we hit that 1100 pixel breakpoint, it's going to add a padding block of 8 rems. So let's go back to our website, go down to mobile, and it looks good. We don't have that padding on the top and bottom. Oops, we have it on the bottom. Oh, I think that might be because of the body, this thing. Let's just get rid of that for now. Yeah, there we go. There's still a little bit there. Oh, it's because of the attribution text. Okay, so I think this is fine. So this is mobile, and now let's increase the viewport width. You can see once we hit above a certain width, it's going to have that beige background color because the recipe is limited to 52 rems, which is 832 pixels. And then this is when it hits here. So if you want to, line up so that this padding appears at the same time as here, then I think you would have to, I think the easiest way would be to add another media query. So for recipe, let's copy this media query. And you do want to try to use the same breakpoints consistently throughout your styles so that things change all at the same time. So we're going to move this max width style down into the media query. So now the padding will get added and then the max width will be set at the same time. So let's try again. So going back to iPhone, everything is max width. So we don't see any beige background. And then when we increase, there we go. So the beige background appears at the same time. So that's probably a little bit better. I mean, I don't think real users are like checking websites like this. I think only web developers do that. But if you're working with people who are checking the website, they're probably going to do that, and then they'll call this out to you. So okay. So that looks pretty good. So, if you don't know what to do next, the thing you can do is always just go back to the design and see how it looks different from what you have on your website. So here's the website, and one difference that I'm noticing is the rounded corners. And then also there's this sort of white space padding inside the recipe card. So let's start by adding a border radius to the recipe div, because this is, the white div. So border radius. And we actually might want this in our breakpoint in our media query as well, because we don't want this to happen on mobile. So border radius, I'm just going to guess. For smaller measurements, I do use pixels because they don't really need to be responsive. They don't need to scale up. Okay. Oh, I didn't add padding, so you can't really see it. You can see here at the bottom. So it is happening at the bottom. It's not happening at the top, and I think it's because of the image. But we need to add padding anyway to it to add the space around. Let's just move this over here. So let's figure out how much space we need to add. So something like that. I'm just going to guess. Again, for our desktop styles, we'll add padding, and it's going to be the same all the way around. So we'll use the padding shorthand to affect the top, right, bottom, and left. And I'm just going to guess 20 pixels. Okay, it's getting there, but let's try testing in the browser. It needs to be definitely more. Why is that not working? I think there's a bug sometime. Okay. I think there's a bug in Firefox. It should be changing the padding here, but it's not for some reason. So let's try doubling it, 40. Okay, maybe a little bit too much. 36. Okay, that looks pretty good, I think. And then it looks like the image also has a border radius. It looks maybe a little bit less than, it's less round than what we have on the white card. So we need to add that style for the image, and this is the only image tag on the website, but it's usually better to use a class to target the specific element. So let's add a class. And what should we say? We can say omelette. Well, maybe we should name it something a little bit more generic, because if you think hypothetically, this recipe template could be used for multiple different recipes, and they might not all be omelets. So let's say recipe image. So this is the BEM block element modifier approach I use when naming. That's what this double underscore is. Basically what this means is that, everything here is in this recipe class. And then child elements inside the recipe div, you can name them class names starting with the sort of parent name recipe, add a double underscore, and then add the name of, the more specific to that element. So recipe image. It looks weird at first, but it does help a lot with organization and also making sure that your styles don't conflict with each other. So I'm going to copy that recipe double underscore image. And I'm going to paste it in there. We could also nest this inside the recipe selector, but I'm just not going to since we already have the class name with the word recipe in there. So I think the border radius is only for desktop. Yeah. So I'm just going to copy this and then I think make it a bit less. 10. This will be less round. I think the card should be more round actually. Let's see if this works here. So weird that it's not updating. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. But anyway, I'm going to increase this to 20. Okay, that's more round. Let's increase this one just a little bit too. All right, that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so we have our styles for kind of the overall page. Actually, you can see the border radius is affecting it there. So we forgot to put it in the media query because we don't want this to be applied for mobile styles. Oops. There we go. Okay, so now the corner, around the corner is gone. Okay, so mobile, and then as we increase, then at desktop we get here. Okay, that looks pretty good to me, at least for the overall styles, and then for the card, and then we added some styles for the image. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at are the text styles. And we're going to start with the title, the H1 tag here. So here's a design for mobile. Now let's look at the mobile website that we have so far and see, what the differences are and what we need to change. So this looks actually pretty close. In terms of the font size, I think maybe it needs to be a little bit bigger. So let's just try some styles here. I'm going to add a selector for the H1 tag and set the font size. And I'm going to start with 2 rems. That is 32 pixels. So here's a design again, and then here's a website. That looks pretty good. Maybe actually a tiny little bit more. Let's try 2.25. That actually looks a lot better. And I guess one other way that will help us figure out if the right font size or not is we need to add space around the text. Kind of like what we did on desktop, but for the entire card. For mobile, we only want it around the text elements, not the image. The image we want to be all the way across. So yeah, you can see there's space on left and right for mobile, and then there is space at the bottom. So the problem here is that if we look at our index.html file again, we had added the padding on desktop to the recipe div, and we can't do that for mobile because of the image here. However, we want to add the space around all the text elements. So what we're gonna have to do is create another div inside the recipe div and then put all the text elements inside it. And that way we can add all the space all at once just with padding. So let's create a new div. going to give it a class of recipe. Since we have recipe image up here for the image, let's try recipe text. There we go. So now I have to select everything through the table. Yeah, and we have to make sure we don't select those two closing divs. So select all the text content and move it into recipe text. There we go. And now we can add the padding to the recipe text class. So let's do that. So I'm going to add the selector under recipe image. Oops. Need to add a dot for the class. And we'll start with padding. And this padding is actually only on mobile. We don't want it on desktop. So we actually need to make a media query that's only going to target mobile. So instead of width of greater than or equal to, we're going to say width of less than 68.75 rems. We're still going to use the same breakpoint just to keep things consistent. And here, we're going to add padding. And this will only affect devices below this viewport width. So let's just start with 30 pixels. Okay, so it actually doesn't look too bad. Let's check what we had for the recipe padding. So 36. I think it should be smaller for mobile because you just don't have as much. And there's a lot of space on the top, so let's see what's going on here. Oh yeah, so the H1 tag has margin on the top, which is what is causing extra space. And we actually don't really want that. So this is another boilerplate style that I usually do. For H1 tags, I actually get rid of the entire margin, so margin on top and bottom. That way I can just add in the space that I need, when it becomes necessary. And then we'll figure out the spacing for the paragraph as well. But this looks pretty good. I might actually make it slightly smaller. The padding, I mean. 30, let's try 24. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. It does look like there's more padding on top and maybe more on the bottom too. So let's do 28. We don't want to go too much different. So I think that looks pretty good. Awesome. Okay, so now we can kind of eyeball the design and sort of make sure that the font size matches the design. So here's a design. And how does that look? I think that's pretty close enough. We're not going to split hairs. I'm going to increase the vertical padding a little bit more. Okay. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so I think we are ready to look at the paragraph styles for mobile. Or actually, we should probably check out the desktop design for the H1 tag, since we're looking at those styles already. Okay, so here's a desktop design. Let's go to our website and go to a desktop view. Zoom out a little bit. And we need to figure out the correct font size for this. And we also probably need to add some space under the image. So just trying to get the same zoom here. Okay, so the font size on the website definitely needs to be bigger. You can see on the design, the word recipe ends kind of here where the plate meets the edge of the frame. So let's go back up to our H1 styles, and we're going to add another media query to change the font size for desktop. So we'll use the same breakpoint, and we'll change font size to, let's try 3 rems. See how that looks. So again, the recipe word is ending right where it meets the edge of the frame. Oh, that's actually not too bad. I think it needs to be a tiny bit smaller. Yeah, it's kind of right there. Let's try 2.75. Okay, and that looks pretty good. Now we do need to add some space under there. So let's see. So the thing is, recipe text for mobile is padding 3024. For desktop, we don't need to add padding on the left and right because we did that with the card already. So the only padding we need to add is above the headline. So one way we could do that is if we look at our markup, it's the image here, and then the text starts under it. So what we could do is add space to the bottom of the recipe image using a margin just for desktop. So let's do that. So recipe image for desktop, add the border radius, and we'll add a margin bottom. I try to say margin block end when I can. So margin block is top and bottom. So margin block start is margin top, margin block end is bottom. And then there's inline, which is left and right. So margin inline start and margin inline end. And same thing with padding, and I think other properties as well. That just helps with directional things, like if you are translating your website to a language that goes from right to left versus left to right, then this kind of helps you not have to make too many changes when the writing direction changes. So anyway, that's why I use margin block end. So let's go with 30 pixels again. So if we look at this space, it's like maybe almost a little less than the font size of the H1 tag itself. So we can kind of use that as a measurement. So I think it should be a little more than 30. Let's try 32. Okay, I think that's good enough for me. So that's pretty good. So now let's make sure we have the right amount of space under the H1 tag. So here's a mobile design. So again, we're probably going to do margin block end for this. So I'm just going to, just so I don't have to retype it out, I'm going to copy the style from the image and I want to paste it for the H1 tag. This might be too much, so let's try 30. Okay, so this is what it looks like. And this is going to be the space after at the bottom of the H1 tag. Oh yeah, we should change back to iPhone. There we go. Okay. So I think we have way too much space compared to the design. So let's try 24. Maybe 20. Okay, I think that's better. And then the same thing for desktop. How does it look on desktop actually? It might be okay. I think it needs to be a little bit more. So we'll copy that. Let's make this 24. That looks pretty good to me. Okay. Now, let's look at the paragraph text on mobile first. And we did go off of the style guide notes to make it 16 pixels. So theoretically, this should match. This should already be correct. So, you know, the zoom's probably a little bit off. So I guess the font size looks okay. We do need to add a line height to the paragraph. There's more space in the design. You can see the lines are more crunched here. So let's add a selector for the paragraph tag, which we didn't have yet. So paragraph, and I'll set a line height of, I usually do like 1.3 to start. So that means it's a bit bigger than the font size. So let's see how that looks. That looks pretty good, actually. Okay, The next thing is the color. Now this looks lighter than what we have for the headline. So let's go back up to our colors. And the headline text we made, or for the H1 tag at least, stone 900. So I'm going to make a guess and say that the stone 600 is what we want to use. Actually, I think I forgot to make the color for the H1 tag. So let's do that. So we want it to be stone 900. So again, we'll add a new color, CSS custom property, and let's say text, or let's say headline dark, because we have other headline tags that are not as dark. And then this will be the stone 900. Okay, and then after that, we'll say color text stone 600. Okay, and then we do need to set that headline dark color on the H1 tag. Oops. There we go. And then we want to set the paragraph to be color text. Okay, so now both the headline and the text colors should look better. Okay, much better. All right, that looks great actually. Let's look at the desktop design for the paragraph. And on desktop, it is 2 lines. So that's one way you can kind of estimate if the font size is correct if you don't have the Figma design. Let's go to our website. So the meets ends like there. So I feel like it might need to be a tad bit bigger. Yeah. So I'm going to copy the media query. And then for desktop, let's change the font size. So by default, it's going to be 16 pixels. So actually, let's just maybe explicitly set it here since we are changing it. So 1 rem is 16 pixels. And then for desktop, we'll make it a little bit bigger. Let's try 1.15 rems. Okay, much better. Yeah, I'm actually very close. Good job, self. Okay. Now, the next thing we want to do is, so if you're noticing what I'm doing with these text styles, first we are getting the font size, the color, and the line height for the text itself. And then we are setting styles for the space under the text. So we have the paragraph text itself looking pretty good. Now we need to get the space under the paragraph and above the sort of pink box. So I'll do this here. And we're going to do this with margin bottom or margin block end again. So we set the space under the H1 tag to be 20 on mobile, and it looks about the same. So let's do that for the paragraph. And maybe we'll do the same thing, same amount of space as the H1 tag. Okay, so here's a mobile site. Here's a mobile site. Here's a space under the paragraph. How does that look? It's a little hard to tell because we need to make the purple card. So I feel like maybe we're okay. So the next thing should probably be, the styles for the card, and then we'll kind of go back and double check the space. So for the card, we do need to make quite a few style changes here. So if we go to our HTML, we'd added everything here in the card div. So I don't know if I like that card class name, to be honest. I might make a new name. Maybe I'll just call this prep because it's preparation time. Okay, so let's add our selector here. So for the class prep, we want to give the background color of this pink color. So let's go back up into our colors here. This looks like the rose 50. So we'll add a new color, prep background. And this will be rose 50. And while we're here, let's also make the color for the headline. So color prep headline, because it's kind of its own thing. It looks like it's also kind of a pink color, but darker. So I think it's a C Rose 800. There we go. And then I think the text color looks the same as it is above here. So I think we're good there. So now in our prep styles, you can say background color, color prep background, and then I'm going to actually nest the H2 tag in here because we only want to affect the H2 tag that's inside the box. So we'll say color, color prep headline, and we actually need to change the font family too. So the font family, let's see, we'd set the actual things here, but I might make these CSS custom properties as well for the serif, for the headline and then the body tag, or maybe serif and sans serif. So let's do that. We're going to say font FF for font family, serif, and then we'll do that. Paste it in here. And then now for the font family, we'll say, or hold on, I'm doing this wrong, I think. That's sans serif, FF sans serif. There we go. And then for the H1 tags and H2 tags, we'll use this. And then we'll make a new FF serif. There we go. So now I'm getting a prettier error. Font family can be the serif. Oops. There we go. So now the reason I'm doing this is it makes it a little easier for organization because I'm only setting the font family, like the actual name, outfit, and young serif one time in the custom properties. So that means that if we ever change the font families, if we have a redesign or something, I can just change it in this one place and it'll affect it everywhere else that it's used. So now for the prep H2 tag, we can say font family should be sans serif. Okay, so now let's see how this looks. Hey, so we have the pink box. We have our new font family working. Now we just need to kind of size things. So this looks a lot bigger, I think, than what we have in the design. Yeah, it looks a lot smaller. So let's make the font size. It's a little bigger than the body text, so it's bigger than 16 pixels, or rather it's bigger than 1 rem. Let's try 1.2 rems. Okay, it's hard to tell, but I think that looks sort of close. Let's also add some padding inside the box. And it's the same space all the way around. So let's try more than 1 rem. Let's try 1.2, or actually, sorry, padding should be in pixels because we don't care if it scales up. Let's try 20 pixels. That's not too bad, actually. And there's also a border radius. It's a little hard to see. Border radius. Let's try 12 pixels. So I think that's okay. Cool. So we're getting there. with the box. So the next thing we want to do is add a little space under the H2 tag. So you can see here, actually there's some space there already. Oh, and that's coming from the list here. So we'll probably need to change these a little bit. Let's see how much indentation we have on the left side in the design. It's actually nothing at all. So we need to add some styles to override these default browser styles for the UL tag. And probably the OL tag too, since I'm assuming they're going to line up the same way. So because it's the purple on the left, that's a padding thing. So you can also see this if you go to the Layout tab in the box model. The padding is 40 pixels on the left. So for UL tags and OL tags, let's add it here. So UL and OL, padding 0. So let's save that. So now the bolts are all the way across, so we actually need a little bit of space. So padding left or padding inline start. Let's try 16 pixels. So that's okay, maybe a little bit more. Let's try 18. Okay, and then we also need to get the font size of the list items themselves. And then we'll also need to figure out the line height and the spacing between the list items because it looks like there's more space than we have at the moment. So this padding inline start thing is going to be kind of a global style. Maybe we can do that for, I think all these could be global styles actually. So I'm going to nest the LI selector here. I feel like the font size is the same, 16 pixels. The color is black because it's not a paragraph. So maybe we will set the color of all the LIs along with the paragraph. So it's slightly messy, but I think the compound selectors are kind of good. We'll do UL, LI, and then OL, LI. So this means that an LI that's a child, a descendant of the UL or OL tags will get affected here. And then we'll move the color style rule there. So there we go. Is that right? Yeah, that looks right. Okay, so we need to figure out now how to add either line height or space. Let's add line height first. So this is like quite a bit of line height. So let's say line height 1.4. Maybe it should be the same as the paragraph. Let's see if we can share these styles. So I'm going to move this one up to the compound selector too, just so we can control all of them in the same place. I don't know if that made a difference at all. Line height. Let's just test, make the line height bigger. Let's try 1.5. Okay, that actually looks better. So I guess we'll just have a separate line height. So let's move this back to the paragraph tag. Okay. That actually looks pretty good. I feel like there's actually more space between these. I'm just gonna make it much bigger just to make it, see if it's actually taking effect. And it is, okay. So let's try 2. Okay, that looks closer, I think. maybe 1.75. Okay. And in the design, it breaks because the minus doesn't fit. Maybe because there's more space to the right of the bullet. So I guess we do need more padding. That's not doing it. We need space between the bullet and the LI. And maybe we need to add that on the LI tag itself. So let's try margin block start for left. Let's just try 20 pixels. Oh, I'm sorry. Margin inline start. That added space on the top. No. Let's try padding. Oh, that did it. So that added space between the marker and then the LI tag. Maybe a little bit less. Okay, that's actually not too bad. Okay, there's a little extra space on the bottom of the block there. Let's figure out why that's happening. So there is... We want to take the bottom margin away from the UL tag. So that's adding extra space. Margin block end 0. Okay, that's much better. So now the space is equal. Cool. So let's see how this changes on desktop now. It actually looks pretty much the same. So, you know, if we go to desktop, it kind of looks like that. Pretty good. So I think we can move on to the next section. Okay, so for the ingredients, we do need to add space under the pink box. So maybe we'll do that by adding it to the prep styles. So prep, here we go. So I'm adding space between sibling elements, meaning elements that are on the same level. So the prep div and then the h2 tag, they're sibling elements because they're on the same level. And I will use margin to add space between them. I've been using padding to add space between an element and the edge of the block. So kind of like this. So that's kind of how I figure out if I should use margin or padding. So to add space at the bottom after the pink card, margin block end, we'll just say 30 pixels because I think we've been using that for stuff. So there we go. Okay, so now for the ingredients, size-wise, it is smaller than the H1 tag, bigger than the prep card H2 tag, but it is the serif font, and it's a brown color. So these H2 tags are both the same color, so we should be able to use just the H2 tag selector. And then we want to set the color. So again, let's just kind of guess. I think it's going to be brown 800. So I'm going to add under color headline dark, color headline brown. Actually, I think maybe primary and secondary might be better things, better names. So we're going to make the H1 tag the primary. And then we'll make the H2 tag secondary. So that means that you can kind of change the colors and you don't have to change the names. Because if I call it brown and then it changes from a not brown color, then it's going to be very confusing. So save that, and then we'll have to change the name of the h1 tag custom property. There we go. So now the color is going to be headline secondary, and we have to do the font size. So we can kind of go off of the h1 tag font size where it's going to be smaller. So let's try 2 rems. And then I'm just going to assume it's going to change for desktop. So kind of preemptively, I'll add the media query. And then we'll add this later. Let's check out the mobile styles. So here's a design. And here is the website. It looks a little bit too big, I think. So 225 to 2. Yeah, so let's try 1.75. Looks a little bit better, but maybe a little smaller still. 1.5 rems. Okay, that might be a little too small. Yeah, a tiny little bit bigger. Let's try 1.6. So, okay, I think that's probably good enough. Cool. And because we had kind of already made the styles for the list from the prep card unordered list, we don't have to do too much work for these because I think it's just the same. So that looks actually pretty good. Okay, so one interesting thing here is that there are lines at the bottom. So there's one after the ingredients, and then one after the instructions, and then there's lines there. So we need to figure out how to add this line. So we could use a HR tag, horizontal rule, to add a line and style that. We also could use a border bottom, which is maybe my preference. But in order to do that, we would have to figure out what element we want that border bottom to be added to. So here we have our ingredients with the list, and then you don't necessarily want to add the line to like the unordered list. So I think what would make the most sense to me is actually maybe making a section tag for all of these. So what I mean by that is section, and I will give it a class of intro because it's kind of like the title and the intro with the preparation time. And the benefit of doing this is that even if you don't add any styles to it, you are organizing your HTML file a little bit better so you can find things more easily, because now, I can fold up this section tag, but I know that it's the intro section. So if we do the same thing, section will say ingredients. Now I can move this here, and then I can do the same thing, section instructions. And this is helpful because, if you do have section specific styles, you can use this class in the section tag, and then whatever, nested tag or child selector you want in there. And it kind of helps you keep things unique. And then nutrition. And there's no styles by default associated with section tags, so you are not going to change the appearance of the site. It's just a little bit more semantic. There we go. So now you can see, if I was coming back to this file, weeks or months later and I had to make some kind of change, it's a lot easier to navigate this instead of just scrolling down and looking for the right element. It's just better organized. Okay, so with all that said, the reason we originally made this was to add the line. So What I might actually do is create a helper class, and I'll say border bottom. And I'm going to add this to the instructions section because both of these are going to have that line. So where should we add this? Maybe after wrapper. So border bottom. And we're going to say border bottom. Let's say 2 pixels solid. And then we just need to figure out the color. It looks like kind of a lighter gray color. I'm not positive, but my guess is the stone 150. Okay, so we're going to make another custom property, color. We'll just say border. So what did we say? C stone 50. Now I can use that in our border bottom. Okay, so now we should see that line. There we go. It's a little bit thick. I think maybe 1 pixel is really what we want here. Okay, hopefully you can see that, but the lines are there. And now we need to add a space above and below the line. And the way we can do that is in the section tag, we can actually maybe add it to the border bottom. So we could say padding bottom 30 pixels. There we go. I feel like it might be more efficient to add the padding to all the section tags themselves. So we might mess up some of the existing styles that we did for like this top part, but I feel like that might be better. Let's think about this. Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. So it's a tag selector, so I'll just do it here. Padding block 30 pixels. So now you can see there's like a little too much padding here, but now in the between ingredients and instructions, it looks pretty good. And then instructions and nutrition. So we just need to cancel out wherever we did this. So there's more space here because it's doubling up. So let's see. Padding block end. So now it's only going to be on the bottom. Let's see if that helps. Oh, what if we added a margin block end also of 30 pixels. Cool. So now the space looks a lot better. So you can see here we have both the padding on the bottom and then we also have the margin on the bottom. So that looks pretty good. And you know, there's more than one way of doing this. You don't have to do it exactly the way I did, but I feel like this works. We need to get rid of this extra space here. Under the prep, it was the margin block end. Yeah. So let's go to the prep, remove this margin block end. Okay. That's looking pretty good. Let's check how it looks on desktop. So it's kind of the same where we have the lines and then the space. So on our website, That looks pretty good to me. Cool. So I think the last thing we need to do is that nutrition table. So we go to mobile, it's like this. Desktop, it is wider. So it looks like it's kind of like the table is 50%. Like each column is 50% of the available width. So, what would be the best way to make this table? I actually haven't really worked with tables in a very long time, so I'm going to be experimenting a little bit here. Okay, that's good. It's like centered, which I don't want. So text line left, will that work? Yeah, it does. Okay, this is actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be because it's like automatically dividing the space into half. So let's copy those styles and paste it in our styles. And we'll go to the tag selectors here before the class selectors. I try to just kind of put them together like that. Okay. Then we need to figure out the font size. I feel like the list items are smaller than the paragraph tags, and they should not be. Okay, so I didn't set any font size at all, I think, for the list items. Oh, here. Okay, so I want them to share the font size. So what we're going to do is move all the font size styles into the compound selector for paragraph and list items. There we go. So now when we save, we have our font size, which should be the same now between list items and paragraphs. Okay, much better. And then these look different. They look smaller font size wise. My guess is that it is from default browser styles. So we may have to add TH and TD to some of this stuff as well. So let's see if just TH and TD work as selectors. Okay, that worked really well. Okay, so it's not quite centered, but there's like a little indentation there. So maybe, where's our table styles? So I'm just gonna nest it inside here. TH and actually just TH is what we want because that's the left column here with the label. So what I'm gonna do is say padding block start 30 pixels, since that seems to be what we're using here. That didn't work. Oh my gosh, I keep mixing up block and inline. Okay, much better. And then for the TR, we need to add a border bottom. And then we'll use the same border color. Oops. There we go. So now, oops, TR. There's no line at all. Why is that? Let me just try to make this really big just to see if anything shows up. Yeah, nothing. It's there, but it's not showing up. Let's try the old standard red. Yeah, it's not working. This might be something table specific. Okay, I'm going to look this up. So what I'm going to look for is CSS. And I'm trying to figure out why the border is not showing up on the TR tag. So let's say table TR border not working. Okay, border on TR element doesn't show. Renders a border if the selector is table TRTD. Interesting. Oh, border collapse. Let's try it. Oh, it worked. Okay. It's kind of like, I guess, margin collapse with that happens sometimes. Okay, so now we just need to add some space inside the TR. Let's see if this works. Padding, block on top and bottom. And it's not a ton. Let's try 14 pixels. It's not working. Oop. Padding blocks don't affect an internal table elements except table cells. So I guess we can try to move this to a table cell selector instead. Let's do it after the TH. Actually, we might need it for the TH and the TD. So header and the regular cell. Oh, there we go. Okay, let's check the mobile version. I kind of forgot about that. Okay. Not too bad. TH is not bold. So font weight 400 for regular. Okay, and then the TD, which is the actual numbers are bold. So it's a bit different. So TD font weight 700 for bold, and it's brown. So here's our colors. It's the same color as the H2 tag. Headline secondary, brown 800. Color table TD, brown 800. So color table TD. There we go. Nice. So I think it looks pretty good. Let's check the desktop again. Okay. Wow. Let's check our desktop design. Nice, that looks pretty good. All right, so that is the recipe challenge from Front End Mentor. If you want to see my source code, I do have it up on GitHub, linked down below. And I really hope that you found this video helpful, especially if you're more of a beginner level. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of this video and if you would like to see more of these in the future. So as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.